Thank you for joining us today virtually. I know it's a little different than in years past. For those of you who have been around in the Perkins coordinator position for a while, we do have several new Perkins coordinators, and this may be your very first semi-annual technical assistance meeting with us. So to those of you who are new, welcome. We're happy to have you on board the Perkins team. So first, I'd just like to share with you the agenda for today's meeting. This was also sent out in yesterday's email with a little more detail. You can plan on having about a 10-minute break at the end of each hour, and we're planning for a lunch break, a 1-hour lunch break from 11 to 12 Central Time, so you can go ahead and plan for that today. In just a moment, I'll share with you some interactive meeting tools that we plan to use today to give you the opportunity to collaborate with some of your fellow Perkins coordinators. Since we're not in person, we'll be using some different meeting tools online. Michael is going to give you a Perkins 5 overview and what's going on with Perkins this year. Then we'll talk about accountability and state-determined levels of performance. We also have Chris Tingle, who will be joining us today. He comes from the Data and Research Office at TBR, and I'm sure most of you or many of you know that he is your contact at TBR for all things related to the Consolidated Annual Report. He works very closely with your research folks at your campuses in compiling the CAR for our colleges. We'll look at some required documentation and the Perkins 5 calendar for 2021. If you've been with us for a while, you know that we basically have at least one item due each month for Perkins. So we'll look at those different reports that are required each month and how to complete those. Those include things like the Uniform Grant Guidance Report, the Annual Risk Assessment, the Comprehensive Local Needs Assessment, of course, the basic grant application, reserve grant application if your college chooses to apply, EPSO reporting, programs of study reporting, the Perkins equipment list, and monitoring. So we'll be looking at each of those in a little more detail today. Jumping back to the Comprehensive Local Needs Assessment, we have a few ladies from some of our colleges who have graciously agreed to share some of their best practices and insights in creating their college's Comprehensive Local Needs Assessment. So you'll get to hear from some of your Perkins coordinator peers today. We'll also be looking at the consultation with stakeholders piece of the CLNA and give you all an opportunity to share who you've been collaborating with and how that's going and share any of your best practices on that. We'll also look at legal spending of federal funds, referring back to the Uniform Grant Guidance for some of those specifics. We'll get to hear from Joy Rich, our post-secondary Skills USA State Director. She will join us just before lunchtime today to give us an update on all things Skills USA moving forward into 2021. And then we'll wrap up the day with mentioning state audit and looking forward to our spring meeting, which will occur in April. We also have allocated time throughout today's presentation for questions. So we will take those as we go throughout the meeting today. So first, I'd like to share with you some of the meeting tools that we'll be using. And just to give you an overview, in yesterday's email, I did send out, I think it was a 2-pager, just to kind of show you what we would be using. Some of these may already be very familiar to you, and some of these tools may be brand new. So I'd like to just go over them with you so you know what to expect whenever you see one of these interactive tools in today's meeting. So the first one is chat. Hopefully we're familiar with chat, but we will use chat in today's meeting. The chat icon, if you're not familiar with it, it looks like a little word bubble, and you can find it in most Teams applications. You can find it in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. You will just click on the chat icon. It opens up a chat box. You can type in your message and click the send button, and that will go out to everyone in the meeting. So I'd like for us to practice using the chat, and this will also help us to double check our attendance for today's meeting. So I'd like for you to open up the chat box and just practice by saying hello to everybody, by typing your name and the college that you're representing today. So go ahead and do that now if you would, please. The second interactive tool that we're going to use in today's meeting is polls. So we will use polls. A poll will either pop up in the middle of your screen or it will pop up in the chat. I know that it will pop up in the chat. It may also pop up in the middle of your screen. This is a new feature for Microsoft Teams meetings specifically. So I think they're still kind of working out some of the details of it. So when you see a poll pop up in the chat, you will select your answer choice based on the question, and then you will click Submit Vote. Your answers are completely anonymous. No one in the meeting, including Michael and myself, will be able to see who answered which answer choice. So keep that in mind as you submit your answers. So I'd like for us to practice using this now. So the question is, how long have you served as the Perkins coordinator for your college? And we can see that 28% in the meeting today have been the Perkins coordinator for less than 1 year. So welcome to all of you. That means that this is your first full-fledged fall Perkins Technical Assistance Meeting. So thanks for being with us. 27% have been with us for 1 to 4 years. And about half of you, 46%, have been the Perkins coordinator for your college for 5 years or more. So once again, thank you for participating in the first poll. Our last interactive tool is Google Jamboard. So we will use Google Jamboard a few times in today's meeting for you to be able to collaborate with your peers. To use Google Jamboard, I will paste a link in the chat. When you see the link, you will click on the link and it will take you to a screen that looks very similar to the picture that you see on the screen here. If you notice, there are some icons on the left-hand side of this picture. Those will be the tools that you're able to use. To keep it simple, if you've never used Google Jamboard, I would suggest just using the Post-it notes. So the Post-it note is the one that it kind of looks like a little sticky note. You'll click on that sticky note, and when you do, it opens up a text box in the middle of your screen. It will look like one of these colored boxes, like the rose box, the green box, or the orange box. And then you can just type your response to whatever the Jamboard question is, and then you click Save, and it will post a little sticky note onto the board. Sometimes when we have numerous contributors to the board, the Post-it notes will cover each other up. So you can very easily just click and drag to move your Post-it note so it doesn't cover up someone else's note. This way, we'll all be able to collaborate together without talking over each other, since we have about 50 people in the meeting today. Okay, one more thing with Jamboards. There's a limit on how many contributors can collaborate on the same board at the same time, and also the boards are only the size of your screen. So if we had all 50 of us collaborating on the same board, there wouldn't be enough room and some of us would get kicked out of the board. So here's how we're going to split the colleges up so that we have enough space for everyone. So here's a map of our colleges. If your college is to the east of Nashville, I would like for you to use the East Jamboard. So I will send that link out first in the chat. If your college is on the Nashville line or to the west, you will use the West Jamboard, which will be the second link that I send out in the chat. Okay, so the East is the first link, Nashville and West is the second link. So here is our Jamboard, our first Jamboard practice assignment. So we've just made it through the Perkins 5 transition year. The transition year was from 2019 to 2020. I would like for you to utilize a Post-it note in Google Jamboard. I will send the link out in just a minute. And I want you to describe the Perkins 5 transition year in one word. So describe it for yourself, for your college in general, or just Perkins 5 in general. So Perkins coordinators in the West are saying it was new, it was a transition, wow, it was overwhelming, it was messy, it was extensive, it was not bad, It was extra. It was frustrating. It was interesting. It was practice. It was different. It was confusing. I think I got them all.
All right, I've got amendments. I've got someone put smooth. I've got overwhelming, interesting, COVID, learning experience. So it sounds like anywhere from the gamut of trying to make it happen and doing the best they can to overwhelming, which was a good summation, I think, for a lot of folks. So thank you all so much for participating in the Jamboard.
Good morning. You all hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Well, I will start with maybe kind of an update on where we are this year, and then talk a little bit about the process this year, and then talk about hopefully where we want to take the process moving forward. So as far as the car reporting this year for the TCATs, aggregate data reports from me were sent out to all of the schools, as well as student record files that I use to build those reports. And hopefully everybody's been able to access those in the TCATs. If you or somebody in your TCAT has not been able to access that student record data, please send me an email and we'll work through it. So for some reason, the security settings have to be a little bit different at some schools as opposed to others, but we'll figure that out. Those reports and the student record data were lacking some information this year. So the placement data and kind of the assessment / industry certification data this year, because that's not completely in Banner at this point, I left that out with the hopes that the schools would be able to fill that in using the student record data I provided. The other item that there was a couple of special populations. Because that special population kind of pop-up survey was not populated in Banner for this year, where I had to go to some backup resources, the FAFSA being the main one to find some of that information. But there's a couple of special populations where there's just not a Banner resource. So disabilities is one, unfortunately, where the data at TBR is lacking. Another one would be kind of the out-of-workforce individuals. For the most part, we were able to cover the special populations with things like FAFSA data, Pell recipient data, and then obviously the students' kind of application data for race, ethnicity, gender, and their relationship to the military. So we did as best as we could with those special populations, but once again, there was a couple areas where we were a little bit lacking this year. The process looked a little bit different for the community colleges. Where I am with the community colleges right now is that 9 of the 13 have their reports completely finished, and I have gotten kind of feedback on those that they look good so far. The other 4 schools, I'm hoping to have wrapped up actually by the end of the day. I got the last institution's files to me from the school yesterday, so hopefully I'll have those turned around and out to those schools by the end of the day. The process for community colleges, because of the way we get data from them not being directly from Banner like we do for the TCATs, requires a little bit more back and forth from the schools. They have to pull some information for me and send it to me, particularly for those special populations, such as the disability, single parent, foster care, homeless, and a couple of other ones. Those are ones where we don't have any data at TBR for the community colleges. And so I've asked the community colleges to submit that data to me, and then I'm able to merge it into their records that we get from the enrollment and reported graduates data. Then I'll send that back out to the schools in the aggregate report form that they need. I've seen a couple of questions pop up that I'll try to address as those come up, but I might miss a couple, so you have to fill me in. As far as the plan to address the missing special populations at the TCATs, for the next round of reporting for next year, we will have the special population survey populated in Banner. That went live this fall. And so those missing pieces that we have currently, we'll start to have that data coming in through that special population survey. Melissa Hunter in my office will have access to that information, and we'll merge it into the files for next year. I think I kind of I forgot the other one is that I saw pop up, but I'll come back around to those questions here in a second. The process moving forward, we hope to automate a little bit for the institutions. We hope that the TCATs, as the data availability in Banner becomes greater, then we'll really just be able to kind of pull one wholesale file. That obviously is dependent on kind of the exit process being completely populated, and there might be places where that's not the case, but we'll do the best we can moving forward. The community colleges, there's always going to be some data that lives outside of Banner, but what we'll try to do is, now that a lot of the schools already have some scripts in place to pull that, I've asked schools that have created those scripts to send them to me so I can distribute to the rest of the community colleges for their use. So I'm thinking that process will be a little bit smoother moving forward now that everybody knows where those special populations live in their Banner system. And so we'll also try to build kind of a better back end for getting that information to me to make that process a little bit more automated. And then finally, I think we're hoping that we can kind of create a better report platform where you all are not waiting on me for me to pull those reports and send them back. But assuming the data was in place, we would have a place where you guys can go and just kind of pull those reports for yourselves, as opposed to having to wait on me to do it all kind of manually on my end. That's an overview. Let me pull up the chat real quick and see what questions. So I think we addressed the special populations question. Those will come in that special populations survey. That'll cover disability, displaced homemakers. I believe there's some questions in there about single parent foster care in the military. So we'll have, for a couple of those, we'll actually have a couple of resources. We'll have that population and their FAFSA data. But for the ones where there's nothing in FAFSA, that'll be in that special population survey. The one about the gender classified as you, that's a good one. So that is an issue basically with all federal reporting, Perkins and IPEDS. There's not really a category that exists for those. What I did in the reporting that I sent out to the institutions is, if the gender wasn't populated, I left them out of that gender disaggregation completely. So there might be a place in your reports where the grand total is higher than the sum of the male and female categories, just because if I didn't find a gender for that student, I just left them off that gender disaggregation completely. The race and ethnicity categories have an unknown field where those would be lumped in if they didn't report a race or ethnicity. The gender, for some reason, doesn't. It's the same with IPEDS. So I just I skipped over those students in that specific one. If you send me data, can I plug it in? Yes, I can. Contact me via email about that. You would need to give me some type of record identifier I can run on, and that would have to come through a secure platform. The Teams channels that we set up for delivery of that data would probably be fine. I will say that if you do want me to do it, I can't promise that it's going to be a quick turnaround, but I'll do my best to get that merged up on my end and back out to you as soon as possible. There's 40 of you all, so I'm working as quickly as possible, but I might not get to it immediately. Will we have a certification tracking screen and banner for the students so they can be tied to their special population information? That's a really good question, and I guess my answer is that I'm not sure. I don't know that there was a plan for certification data to go into Banner. I know a little bit about the placement being in the exit survey. I'm not sure about certifications. I'll check with the shared services to see what their plan is there. We're trying to get as much of this stuff into Banner as possible to lessen the load on all of us, but that might be the one that's kind of the last outstanding piece, hopefully by this time next year. But I'll get some feedback from shared services on that and see if there's something we can do about that one. I think that's kind of an overview of where we are. Like I said, I'm hoping that for community colleges, I'll have this wrapped up today. TCATs, I know there's still some work in progress. Please continue to reach out to me by email with questions you have, and I'll do my best to answer those as quickly as possible.
Chris, thank you for today's presentation, and also for your continued hard work in the data section, because I know that we are closer this year than we ever have been to having most of this as automated as possible, and so hopefully next year we're a step closer, along with the other steps that Chris mentioned about turning the data back around to you all in a more automated format. So, Chris, thank you again for your time. So, looking at Perkins 5, so as you all know, in the summer of 2018, Congress and then the President signed the Perkins 5 Act, which reauthorized Carl D. Perkins Career and Technical Education Act of 2006. There was also an increase at that time in the amount of funding that was given to Perkins. So in that realm, most of you know, since we have about half of those on the call who listed that they have been around Perkins for at least 5 years or more, and the other half of you are relatively new, 4 years and less, is that in the state of Tennessee, the Tennessee Department of Education is the grantee. So the way that within the Perkins Act, or technically with all federal funding that goes out to the states, there has to be a grantee within every state. Tennessee Department of Education is the grantee for Tennessee. In some states, they do have their Board of Regents as the grantee, but in Tennessee, that's not the case. Nonetheless, so we had to create a memorandum of understanding with the Tennessee Department of Education back in 2006 to get any access to Perkins funding. But prior to 2006, we didn't have access on the post-secondary side to Perkins in Tennessee. It all went to the secondary side. But now we get 15% of those funds. In 2006, we agreed at TBR that we would split those funds evenly between the community colleges and the technical colleges. And what was going on at that time is there was some what was called vocational funding. Before the phrasing career and technical education, the word was vocational funding. There was vocational funding that was going away for the TCATs in the amount of about $1 million. And back in 2006, our split was going to be in the realm of $2 million if we got the 15%. And so that basically, if we split that in half, $1 million for TCATs, $1 million for the community colleges, would then allow for the TCATs to have a replacement for the vocational funding that was going away from the federal level. So that helped the agreement along at the TBR and college level that we would split that funding. And so that has been maintained over the last 14 years, a 15% split. I will say that behind the scenes this past 18 months, the Chancellor, Dr. Deaton, Dr. Lemming, and myself, we have been having conversations with the Department of Education to increase that 15% split with the Department of Education. The reason that there is a rub with that on our part is that by legislation, if we receive more than 15% of the split of those funds, of the Perkins state level funds, then we cannot allocate those funds as we choose. There is a specific formula that's based upon basically your number of concentrators at your college. So basically a per capita or per student rate that would apply. And so for your smaller colleges, that amount would dramatically decrease. So for your TCATs who currently get $50,000 each, some of those TCATs, and I've shared these numbers with you all, for those who've been around for at least 3 years, I've shared these in written form before, but some of our colleges would get as little as $7,000 to $9,000 instead of $50,000. Our larger community colleges, particularly, some of those would double from $100,000 to $200,000 or even $300,000. So we're still having those discussions with the Tennessee Department of Education. And until they haven't really budged, to be honest. So any percent that we go up obviously decreases a percent on their side, even though it's the average across the country is 40% split to 60%, with 40% going to post-secondary. We do only get 15%. So we have all these figures and facts that we've put on our side to even go towards the governor to try to change that split. Now we have a different governor. And so those conversations are ongoing. But at this point, we still maintain the 15% split, and then that gets split evenly between the community college and TCATs. I know there's a lot of rambling there going on, but nonetheless, to update for those who've joined since the meeting started, we did get our grant award notification from the Tennessee Department of Education yesterday. We are in the process of writing each of those letters that will go out to each college separately, and then putting those in DocuSign for the chancellor to sign off on. That will then go to your president. So those should be forthcoming in the next 10 to 14 days. So hopefully by the end of next week, by December 11th is the hope, is that your college will get those, the grant award notification that officially says you have funds that will be reimbursed through Perkins for the fiscal year 21 that we're currently in, even though that was due to us July 1. We did get it yesterday. If there's any questions about any of these topics, please feel free to drop them in the chat. And we will answer those as we go along. So for those who've been around for any length of time, if you've known me for any length of time at all, I 100% believe that my job is here to support you as a college. Shana and I, neither one of us are here to try to get you or get your college and get anyone in trouble, as it's just the opposite. We are to make sure that you don't get in trouble fiscally, financially is what I meant to say, financially, especially through these through the state and federal audits particularly. We also just want to make sure that you're spending your funds correctly. And correctly, I mean legally. I will not have pet projects that I want you to focus on per se, but we want to make sure that you're playing within the legal bounds that you're allowed to. And that those bounds are pretty wide as long as you understand what those are. And I do know, and so does Shana, that your job is not 100% Perkins. Perkins is usually one of the add-ons that you have to your as other duties assigned as you go throughout your normal day on your college campus. So Shane and I are the experts. So if you have a question at any time, please email, call, text, whatever it is, and we will answer those questions. Remembering that the key here is that you can only spend your funds that you have put in your application that has been approved. Now you can change that application at any time during the year. And a lot of times we've had several, more than a couple of dozen already this year. And that's quite okay. If you have a question saying, hey, we didn't hire somebody, we thought we were going to have July 1, we didn't hire them until October, that means I have $10,000 extra, we'd like to buy this piece of equipment. We'll follow up with a couple of questions, making sure that it's allowable. And then we'll tell you yes, no, approved, et cetera, so forth. And then if it's approved, then you make minor changes to your application, submit it, we officially approve it, and that allows you to then spend funds to that application, so that when this time next year, or this time in 2021, probably closer to October, when the state audit comes back around, they're going to look at your application and see what you spent it on and make sure that you spent funds according to your approved application. So that's the idea. Sometimes some of you want to have a conversation instead of putting things in an email. Totally understandable. We're happy to have those conversations anytime you want to, but we are here to support you. The reason that we have those reports broken up once a month is so that you don't have them all due prior to submitting your application for the next year in May. Because basically moving forward, what we have to do is if you don't have a report turned in, then we can't approve your annual application for July 1. So again, spreading those out across the year is a creation to help you, because again, we know that Perkins is not the only thing that you do. And so if you have one report a month, then that's better than having 10 to 12 in May that you have to do on top of the application. So there is a reason for the madness, and we try to be transparent. And that's one thing Shannon and I always talk about, is that we want to make sure our process is transparent to you, simply because if you see something that doesn't make sense and we can change it, I want to make it easier for you. Shane and I want to make sure that we're supporting you. So if I don't say that enough, I want to make sure that you hear that, is that we are simply here to support you. We do not add on requirements for you. We are basically passing those federal requirements down. And where I can diminish those from TDOE, we have done so as well. So any questions on Perkins 5? I didn't do any talking about Perkins 4, simply because for those who are new, if you didn't know Perkins 4 before you started here, that's okay, because all of those changes from Perkins 4 to Perkins 5 are not relevant anymore, except for those who know Perkins 4. Those things from Perkins 4 still apply if you already knew them. Some of those that have changed that mean the most difference we'll talk about today, but we have, including the CLNA, the Comprehensive Local Needs Assessment, and those type of things. So we'll talk about those as we move on. But if you feel left behind because you didn't know Perkins 4, that's quite all right. You have less confusion in your mind. You're only learning one thing. One of those new things is the STLOPS. I don't know why nobody else across the country hasn't started using that acronym, but it makes sense to me. We used to have the FOPLs, but now they are the STLOPS, State Determined Levels of Performance. So one of the big things that changed with the STLOPS in Perkins 5 is that we no longer, and I say we as in me, I no longer as a state have to negotiate with the feds. If you remember, for those who've been around for any length of time, in Perkins 4, every year we would talk about during one of these meetings what we wanted our at the time FOPLs, but now STLOPS to be for the next year. And so we would discuss that, and then in about March of each spring, I would talk to the U.S. Department of Education, and if graduation rate, I'm going to make one up, if our graduation rate was at 70%, and we were going to go in and our first negotiation with the feds would be, they would say, okay, you need to have your graduation rate at 100%. I would say you are correct. We do need to be at 100%. However, we agree that we'll go up to 71%. And then that would go back and forth. And then at some point, because I never really moved from the first thing that I negotiated with, is that we would end up on the final point after about 3 rounds. The U.S. Department of Education, basically because of the legislation, after 3 rounds, the last number that the state offered up was what we went to. So that negotiation basically wasn't much of a negotiation, although across the states, most states would give and take. So if most states started at 70 and the U.S. Department of Education said 100, then the state might come back and say, well, we'll do 80, and then the feds would come back and say, well, we'll do 90, and then finally they might settle on 85. So a state would go from 70 to 85 in 1 year, and just simply because I'd read the legislation, I knew that whatever we said as a state was actually going to be what happened. And we would negotiate back and forth. I just didn't move off of my negotiating point. And so we would only go up to 71%. But now we don't do that anymore. So the problem with that is that in Perkins 5, we have to set it for 4 years. So on the front end, we had to set our goals for 4 years. And the reason that's a problem for Tennessee, and it's unlike this for any other state, is because for those who didn't know that, on the community college side, we defined a concentrator. So everything's based upon this concentrator definition. And we defined a concentrator in Tennessee as a student on the community college side who had at least 30 hours of college credit. On the TCAT side, it was a student who completed 1 trimester. So for the TCATs, that hasn't changed under Perkins 5. Good news. For the community college side under Perkins 5, it did change because now the feds in the legislation actually stated that a concentrator is defined as a student who has at least 9 credit hours. And so that changes our denominator completely for the community college side. So our denominator was anticipated to balloon this year, since we, instead of 30 credit hours, it was only 9 credit hours, or 12 credit hours, earned at least 12 credit hours. And so going and trying to set 4 years of accountability measures with the STLOPS was very difficult in trying to plan that out and not cause a problem for our community colleges. So Chris Tingle and I worked very closely together in trying to anticipate how large that concentrator denominator would be in that formula, going from 30 hours to 12 credit hours on the community college side. And so we came up with a set of numbers that I think each of you have seen now as far as the 4-year plan that Shana has sent out at least once anyway. And that we were very conservative in that guess, or in that estimate, I should say, because I would rather definitely err on the side of the low side for our community college and TCATs instead of a side that would be detrimental and cause a lot of annual improvement plans. So I hope we erred on the side of being conservative on that, because we actually can change the STLOPS if we notice that we are 20 points better than what we projected, or 20 percentage points better than what we projected. We can always change those. We cannot change going backwards. So if we, for some reason, if we set the goal at 70% for graduation rate and you only have 50% graduation rate for your concentrators, we cannot then go back and change our targets. because in the legislation, you can't change them if you actually did not make your target. You can only change them if you made your target and you want to readjust. So I know, Shayna, thank you for trying to keep up, because I know I'm jumping all over the screen here as far as different slides. But currently, since we haven't seen these numbers yet for this year, we don't even know what our baseline data is. That's why Chris came on earlier. Normally we meet in December, simply because we have all those numbers, and that you as a college can look at your numbers for this particular year and see if you made the goal. You may, I don't know, maybe individual colleges have seen some of your numbers yet. I have not seen those yet. We would have liked to have a nice chart here to let you see how many of the colleges made 1P1, 2P1, and 3P1, but we just don't have those at this time. If you have those, that's fine. And I know I may get ahead a little bit here, but no matter what your numbers are, since this is the baseline year, you will not have to create an annual performance improvement plan based upon this year's data, because it's considered the baseline data. What we will do, though, is that will give us a good idea once we get those baseline numbers in of our projection for the next 3 years on the goals. So this will be for those who've been around for this being at least if you've been around at least one full year. Last year, because we were transitioning from Perkins 4 to Perkins 5, we didn't have an improvement plan. So this being the baseline year, there will not be an improvement plan in January. So good news, your next report's not due till February, which will be the UGG. So that's also good news, right, Terry?
Okay, so under Perkins 5, 1P1 is retention and placement. 2P1 is credential, certificate, or diploma. 3P1 is non-traditional program enrollment. So the one that's no longer required under Perkins 5 to be reported is non-traditional completion. Enrollment is one of the indicators, but completion is not. So apologize if that was tricky for you. Michael mentioned the concentrators definition earlier, because all of this is linked back to CTE concentrators. So I did move forward to show you the concentrator definition on the screen as he was speaking about that definition. But just to review, at the post-secondary level, a student enrolled in an eligible recipient who has earned at least 12 credits within the CTE program or program of study. And keep in mind that doesn't count general education courses. So an English course, an introductory math course, those aren't counting towards the 12 credits to be considered a CTE concentrator. It would be CTE courses that are specific to their program, such as cosmetology, nursing, welding, whatever the program may be. Or completed such a program if the program encompasses fewer than 12 credits or the equivalent in total. So if the whole program were only 9 credit hours, and the student completed it, that student would still be classified as a CTE concentrator. Okay, so looking in a little more detail at the 3 indicators of performance, just to refresh your memory for those who have been around a while, and just as a review for the newer folks. Retention and placement, this is the percentage of CTE concentrators who during the second quarter after program completion accomplished one of these items. And this is coming straight from the Perkins 5 legislation. Remain enrolled in post-secondary education, are in advanced training, military service, in a program that receives assistance under Title I of the National and Community Service Act, are volunteers with Peace Corps, or are placed or retained in employment. And keep in mind, we're looking at CTE concentrators who accomplished one of these items. 2P1, credential, certificate, or diploma, the percentage of CTE concentrators who receive a recognized post-secondary credential either during participation in or within 1 year of their program completion. And finally, 3P1, non-traditional program enrollment. This is the percentage of CTE concentrators in CTE programs and programs of study that lead to non-traditional fields. And I know Michael worked on a committee that just updated the non-traditional crosswalk. Michael, I don't know if you wanted to share anything on that.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. I was fortunate enough through the National Alliance for Partnerships and Equity, where I'm sitting as the National Policy Chair and the President-elect, that we are the organization that works with the U.S. Department of Education on the non-trad occupations. So the last time we did that was 2013, and we've been working since early 2019 with the U.S. Department of Education on the new release of that. That was finished up in the end of September, and I believe it was released in October for the 2020 non-trad occupations. There has been some changes within there, and so what we've always said at the state level, i.e. TBR, that you can utilize that non-trad occupation list released officially by the U.S. Department of Education for 2020 to determine if your programs are non-traditional. Now, if for some reason in your region, when I say region, those counties and areas that you have reached with your college, if within that reach you have data that shows that a field is non-traditional in your area, and you have the data to show that, even though that might go against what the national numbers have, then that is acceptable for you as a college to claim that particular occupation as non-traditional. And I will give a terrible example that may or may not be true for any one of you. If I live in Section X of Tennessee and I have a hospital, a large hospital that has split 50-50 with nurses being male and female, then that is not considered a non-traditional occupation in my area, even though nationally and in Tennessee, nursing is a non-traditionally dominated female occupation. So if you chose not to utilize nursing as a non-trad occupation and you had the data to back that up for your area, then that would be allowable. And the reverse would be true if you showed it that it was a non-traditional field for women, meaning that less than 25% of those were employed in your area in nursing, even though that is the opposite of what the national data says. As long as you have sufficient data that proves that out, then you would be able to use that local data. It would obviously be a change that we have to make changes here at TBR for your particular college, but anytime you have local data that goes against or shows some special oddity about your region or your area, then you are freely allowed to utilize that data. But that new crosswalk is out there. I believe that we sent that out, Shana, did we not?
I'm not sure that we sent it out.
Okay. Well, why don't we put that? That's not a list on that. We'll send that. Yeah, we'll send that link out to everyone at the end of today or possibly tomorrow once we get through the things that we're working on today. But if you have not received that or don't know where it's at, we will send that out.
Okay, I will do that. Okay. I do see just a few things in the chat. We will get to those in just a moment. Before we get to those, I just want to wrap up this section by showing you the state determined levels of performance. Like Michael mentioned earlier, we submit those in our Perkins State Plan for a 4-year period. So the year that we've just finished up was our baseline year, the transition year. So those figures are on the top row of numbers here. And this chart is for community colleges. The TCAT chart I will show you in just a moment is slightly different. So whenever we're looking at our CAR data that you either have just received or will be receiving very soon, you're looking at the figures on the top row here. So retention and placement, 48%. Credential, certificate, or degree, 40%, and non-traditional enrollment, 18%. So those figures there are going to tell you if you've met or have not met the goal. In the year that we're currently in, we're looking at fiscal year 2021. So we're working to achieve the figures that you see in the second row of numbers there. Let me show you the chart for colleges of applied technology. Again, the first row of numbers is our baseline year. So whenever you receive your car data in the next week or so, you'll be looking for these figures: retention and placement 48%, credential, certificate, or degree 60%, and non-traditional enrollment 8%. And these are the figures for TCATs. This information was sent out, I want to say it was this summer, but it is also in our Perkins team on Microsoft Teams in the files area. You should be able to find the full list there for each college. Okay, questions. I see some more popping up in the chat. Michael, it looks like maybe you're answering those.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I'll give another moment for any other questions related to accountability or state-determined levels of performance, concentrators, non-traditional enrollment. Okay, next we'll take a look at special populations. So I'd like for you to take just a minute, and I'm not going to put up a poll or anything for this, but just a little self-assessment pop quiz type of assignment. I want to see if any of you can list the 9 special populations identified under Perkins 5 without looking up the information. So without looking at the Perkins legislation or looking at your CAR template or data or any of that. And you can just do it on a scrap piece of paper at your desk. And how about I give you 60 seconds to see if you can list all 9 special populations identified under Perkins. I already see I cannot. Okay, 60 seconds starts now. Okay, time's up on the pop quiz for the 9 special populations. So I'll show you the answer here on the screen, and you just score yourself. See how many of the 9 that you identified without looking at the answer. Here they are: individuals with disabilities, individuals from economically disadvantaged families, including low-income youth and adults, individuals preparing for non-traditional fields, single parents, including single pregnant women, out of work individuals, English learners, homeless individuals, youth who are in or have aged out of the foster care system, and youth with a parent who is on active duty military. So if you got all 9 right, just go ahead and brag on yourself in the chat and tell us you got them. You got them all right. Bill says 0. That's okay. Okay, so we have heard from some of you, and we understand that collecting information and collecting data on some of these special populations has been a challenge. So I'd like to give you an opportunity to collaborate with your peers across the state by using a Google Jamboard. And here's what we're going to look at. I want you to share things that have been going well, things that are maybe just kind of taking off or just emerging, and then the challenges when it comes to collecting data for special populations for Perkins. So here's a little more detailed look at what that's going to look like. So we're breaking it down into, when you get to the Google Jamboard, you'll see 3 different pages. There will be a page for roses. So that's what are the college's roses as related to data collection for special populations. So what are the things that are going well? And you can list the specific populations that are going well if you'd like. The buds would be things that are emerging. What are the college's buds as related to data collection for special pops? So maybe things that maybe you've discovered a new contact or you've heard about something that someone else is using. And so you're kind of just on the front stages of getting into that area. And then the thorns are, what are the college's thorns as related to data collection for special populations? So what are the areas that have been really challenging and that have really been a struggle for your college in collecting special population data? Okay. I know we have several responses on the west side of the state. Hopefully we have some on the east side as well. So we'll just share out some of those responses so that both sides of the state can kind of hear. Before we get to that, I saw that Lynn posted a comment in the chat. Chattanooga State Community College, the IR department collects the data. So the Perkins coordinators aren't necessarily involved in the process. And that may be the case for several of our colleges. I do think some of our colleges that our coordinators are a little more involved in the process. I don't know if you want to speak any more on that, Michael. I know I've just heard from.
What I would say is that while your IR folks, especially at the community college level, do that primarily, and on the TCAT side, it's primarily out of the central office, but insert yourself in that process, even if it's asking for a copy of the report at a minimum, simply because you are the person at the college that is responsible for any type of work that's required as a result of the data. So if there's an improvement plan, you're the person responsible for writing that improvement plan and making sure it's implemented. So at a minimum, if you should be able to ask questions, but at a minimum, we should be able to gain the report at least.
So in the West, for roses, so things that are going well for collecting special populations data, someone says we explain the meanings of special populations categories during orientation to help students understand. Someone says all of our programs have at least one non-traditional student. As I tour students, I ask prior if they will speak to how things are in the class. They agreed, so this helps. And then the rest of it got cut off. Hiring non-traditional faculty as much as possible, aka a male nursing instructor. Military student union that provides support to that special population. And then I also have contracting with licensed counselor that provides and tracks various special population needs.
Good. Similar, we have some of those same roses. Also, we have receiving data, dedicated data person like Chris Tingle, student survey that's now in Banner, collecting correct data, the data being collected in Banner, which is new on the TCAT side, talking to and finding out what students want. Great faculty and staff that are very engaged in creating new ways to attract special populations, and instructors that are creating bonds with students. So those are some of the roses we have on the east side.
Very good. Emerging, things that are emerging as far as data collection in the West, we have new student intake forms specifically requesting home list, aged out of foster care info, new data committees, Achieving the Dream Network, Quest program, working within classes to make sure students complete the special population survey in Banner. I am currently in the process of redoing all of our flyers and marketing items to be inclusive and diverse. Sometimes we just snag a picture and do not think about what message that might be saying or sending. Hosting adult education regional programs on main campus. Majority of adult ed students represent special populations.
Very good.
Very good.
Creating additional banner holds for gender options. Creating and building an internal certification tracking system that includes special population data. Changing an emerging banner to collect more data. And looking forward to the banner summary page that Chris has alluded to.
Mm-hmm. And then thorns, things that have been challenging for the college in collecting data, attracting students to non-traditional programs in general, getting students to complete the survey and to take it seriously, merging placement data with special population data, understanding its value, communicating the results. And then I also have COVID has decreased enrollment with social distancing. Also, my presence in high schools is limited, as well as tours and career fairs. Our recruiting efforts are more in the social media realm.
Additional gender fields is a thorn. Creating surveys possibly that are not already in Banner. Getting truthful information. Don't have a good way to identify students, real-time access to aggregated data in Banner, tracking certification data, ADA, homeless, foster care, Banner not collecting all data, and no collection. No, I guess it's referring to collecting manually. No collection means, especially in a COVID environment, and trying is new to this and trying to figure out how to gather all the data. And it's obviously more challenging in a COVID environment where you can't get out with the students. And that's always been hard in the past. When we could get to the students, it was just a matter of getting responses back from students because previous to anything that we could get collected in Banner, the manual process can be overwhelming, especially when you're talking about thousands of students. So very difficult. So thank you all for sharing your roses, your emerging buds, and your thorns.
Are there any questions, comments, concerns related to special populations or anything that we've just mentioned across the state? If so, you're welcome to type those into the chat. Or if you'd like to come off mute, you're welcome to do that as well.
All right, so along with that, any general questions about the CAR? Understanding that mostly at the community colleges, you have folks in the IR department, institutional research, who are doing that alone. I know that I've worked with colleges over the last couple of years that we really had to have long conversations, and sometimes that meant me going to colleges with the IR folks to make sure that things were being collected correctly. And so understanding that either if you're new or if you have a longstanding IR staff that are confident in what they do, and then sometimes you might feel like you're out of the room and not really participating enough. But usually they're very helpful in trying to help break down what that data is. And if nothing else, I can start the conversation with Chris Tingle, and we can supply you with what he gives to the IR folks. At this point, basically what Chris Tingle does is he gives each of the IR folks at the community colleges the report that they need to run. So Chris can answer most of those questions. It's just a matter of sometimes colleges like to, they may have different scripts that they can add to it. And Chris mentioned that earlier, that some colleges have scripts that they can run to get special pop data that he doesn't know about. And so when he gets those, he can then share those. So your college may be doing something different in addition to what Chris sends out. But if you're not sure how that process works, I can get Chris to share that with you if you're interested, either through an email or maybe even a short call that we do maybe as one of our technical assistance calls for about 10 or 15 minutes that Chris can pre-record and to even take questions that shares how he sends that out and what data he's collecting. And that may be a starting point, Shayna, if we want to remember that for technical assistance that we'll do. We might record that anyway. And so for the handful of you that would be interested in that, to know what the IR folks are getting at the community college level from Chris. And then at the TCAT level, I may have JB come in and talk about some of that, what he does in student services, because most of that's happening out of his office or out of our office, Office of Student Success under student services. So that may be a technical assistance that we do for our TCATs as well. So if that sounds good, then just let us know in the chat. Otherwise, if there's other questions, we'll do that as well.
Okay, thank you. Judy from Pellissippi says she's interested to see the surveys that other folks are using at other colleges. So if any of you would like to share those surveys, I can get those to Judy at Pellissippi. Terry says with changeover in IR, the data collection process is challenging. Demaria at Southwest would appreciate, I think she was referring to that technical assistance on the IR data collection. Okay, so to wrap up the section on the consolidated annual report and that data collection piece, we'll look at action plans. So Michael mentioned it earlier, gave it away that since we are using the data from the transition year or the baseline year, that action plans actually won't be required in January, even if indicators weren't met. So there's a Christmas present for you. Happy holidays. But here is the template of what it would look like, because moving forward, and in the past, if you've been around, you know that these have been required. So if the college does not meet an indicator, Michael, is this one by 90%? Yes, it is by 90%. If the college doesn't meet 90% of one of those three indicators, then the college would have to produce an action plan for the indicators that were not met. So this is just a very simple cut and paste template of what that would look like. I think it's a 2 or 3 page template. But again, you don't have to worry about this for January. So this will be, you'll look at it the next January 2022. Questions on that? I know I didn't really spend hardly any time at all, but since it's not due in January, I don't know that there's a whole lot of point in discussing it right now.
Yeah, the only thing I would say is that what the example that you brought up was a 3-year plan. And for those who've been around will know this already, but when you start getting your data, thank you. As you start getting your data, and we already had one comment that said that they didn't make the non-trad, which is 3P1, non-trad enrollment. So the idea there is that you have at least 25, I forget what the percentage is for Tennessee, but the 25% enrollment for non-traditional is kind of the benchmark. If for some reason you didn't make that this year, even though it's just the baseline, you might start at least thinking in your mind, or maybe even asking other colleges what they've done in the past, because this is one that has existed in the past. But in looking at a 3-year action plan, especially when it works around non-traditional enrollment, that's not usually something that happens, that changes dramatically in 1 year to the next, from 1 year to the next. And so instead of having to then turn around and do another plan the following year, if you do more of a general 3-year action plan, possibly for next January, just be thinking in that mindset. That helps as you move forward to the next year in case you don't meet the goal again, which is very typical, that you have a broad general plan to try to meet that goal over the next 3 years, which does help in my discussions with the U.S. Department of Education, because what the U.S. Department of Education is looking for is that the state, i.e. TBR, has a plan in place for locals, i.e. colleges, who do not make their do not meet the STLOP benchmarks. And so if you have a 3-year plan in place, then as long as you haven't painted yourself into a corner with that plan, then you will have a progression of showing how you will improve over that 3 years, as opposed to writing a new plan annually each of those potentially 3 years or longer. So that's just an FYI, and that you can kind of forget about for the next 12 months. Hopefully you don't have to worry about that next year. But as you get your data this year, just pay attention to see if there were some benchmarks that you do not make, even though it's a baseline year.
Okay, if you have any questions regarding action plans, feel free to type those in the chat and we can get to those. For now, let's go ahead and move on to required documentation. This is the Perkins 5 required documentation calendar for calendar year 2021. I won't read through each piece of it, but you can see that there's basically one report that's due each month. Some months you might have a couple of things due. This was also sent out in the attachments with yesterday's email in the meeting reminder, and I will also post this in our Perkins team in Microsoft Teams. This was also sent out yesterday. This is just an overview of required documentation that's been submitted by college for this fiscal year. So since July 1st, 2020, if your college has submitted the documentation, you have a check mark there. And if you haven't submitted the documentation, the box is blank. So we're asking that if you are a little behind on your documentation, if you could try to get some of it in or all of it in by the end of the year, that would be great. Keep in mind, Michael mentioned earlier that moving forward, we have to have that documentation on file to be able to approve grants for the next year. So that will be in May 2021. So please take a look at this chart. Again, it was an attachment in the email. And these are the community colleges, and I will show you the TCATs as well. And let me just mention, if I missed your documentation, I apologize. I am human. I did go back and I rechecked everything that was submitted in Teams, but I still could have made a mistake, and there could be an empty box where you actually did submit something. So please forgive me if I missed something. And if you would just send me an email and tell me, hey, we actually did submit that document, and here it is. So please forgive me if I did miss something, but I feel like this is pretty up to date and pretty accurate. Somebody mentioned in the chat, if you didn't have any equipment, Perkins equipment, do you still send in something? If you would, just send in the equipment template and just put not applicable on the template, just so that we have that on our record. Okay, yes, Michael answered in the chat as well. Thank you. Any other questions on that update list? No. Okay, so we're getting into the section of our meeting on required documentation, and I believe Michael is going to speak on the Uniform Grant Guidance Report.
Yes, if you'll show the next slide, and then I'm going. Okay, so this is a copy of the sample of the UTG. And if you can, Shayna, here in a second, I want you to, if you'll unshare that and then actually load that, put that in the chat box so folks can pull it up. I'm going to share my screen real quick because you see that color-coded section there that we see. I'm going to share the actual guidance itself. Okay, so 200.328 in the Unified Grant Guidance. So back in 2013, under the president then, we had to take all of our previous guidance in different sections under the federal code and unify it because there would be 3 or 4 different pieces that would be duplicated across multiple platforms within OMB and other areas. And so the Unified Grant Guidance took all of that for federal funds and put it in one place. I'm not reading this to you. What I'm going to go down is I'm going to scroll down just a little bit, and sections that you'll notice are now colored or highlighted. So I actually took this legislation and copied and pasted it into an Excel document that Shayna had up just a moment ago, and you notice that was color-coded. Well, the reason it's color-coded is because I took the legislation just like this and I broke it up into different sections. So just to actually read the number 2 here, the non-federal entity, which in this case is TBR, must submit performance reports using an OMB-approved government-wide standard collection. Now, OMB does not have a government-wide collection standard. Tennessee's has basically become the de facto for that. We were the first state that submitted such a thing, and the way that we did that is we just took the actual legislation that you see here, and each one of these is a question. So the yellow part there is question, I believe, 1, and the blue and so forth is broken down in each of those. And actually, I think maybe the yellow section there is more than one question, but you'll just notice as I'm scrolling down, each of these were set into, were color-coded. Like section C here, it talks about construction. Well, I didn't include that because we don't do construction with Perkins dollars. So and that's for all Perkins dollars, by the way. But there are other federal funds that would allow for construction, but that doesn't apply to us. So I didn't even highlight that and include that in our report. But you see that this is where this comes from, is 200.328. And then if I scroll on down, now you see within the report, this top section here that has 1P1, 2P1, 3P1, 4P1, 5P1, 5P2. Obviously, it's been updated to just have 1, 2, and 3, but the yellow section is still the same. If I scroll back up to the yellow section here, a comparison of actual accomplishments to the objectives of the federal award, and I scroll back down to the actual document, you see number 1, what was the objective for the year? What was the actual accomplishment? So if your objective was 70%, what was your actual accomplishment? 72%. Was it met for the year? Yes or no? What was the computation for cost? Again, if I scroll back up into the L section, you'll see in here computation of cost, performance trend data. So everything basically copy and pasted into a report format, so that you could also then scroll back up, for example, in this example, and see the actual legislation of itself. Number 6 there in the blue, if number 3 was no, and number 3, I don't even see it on here. I don't know why it's not listed. Another question, obviously. What was number 6? Go back up to the blue. Reasons why established goals were not met. Okay. So number 6, so if you did not meet your goal, oh, I see, these numbers are off in this example. So 2 is what was the actual accomplishment, 3 is what objective accomplished, computation, and so forth. So all of these, again, relate to the explanation or the exact code that's listed under 200.328 here. So this is kind of the explanation for the UGG, as it is a requirement. It's due 90 days after the end of the reporting data, which we report by the end of November. So therefore, it's due by the end, 90 days later, by the end of February. So that's why the report is due in February. For some reason, if we didn't get the data collected until July, then it would be due 90 days after that. But since we collect it by the end of the November, then it's due 90 days at the end of that. So those dates, again, are all incumbent upon the legislation. So the UGG has to be answered based upon 100% of the goal. That is different than than the other report that you have to do that's based upon 90% of the goal. So you're like an action plan, for example, if you didn't make it. So it doesn't matter if this is a baseline year. It doesn't matter if it's a transition year. The UGG has to be done every year. And no matter if you make all your goals or you don't make your goals, the UGG has to be filled out for each of 1P1, 2P1, and 3P1. So if you make all of your goals, you still have to answer those questions. Some of those questions only apply if you did meet your goal. And some of those questions only apply if you did not make your goals. So you will only fill out the appropriate questions, but you will complete the UGG, that's for those sections, for each of the 3 goals of the STLOPs. And so that will have to be done in February. Some colleges already starting to turn those in, and we understand that if you are, because it's not complicated if your college has already completed those. So it could be a report that takes you 15 to 20 minutes if you've got your data already done, and you can answer those questions pretty quickly. Nowhere in there is there need to be any type of narrative. There could be a place where you put 1 or 2 sentences, but the purpose of the UGG is that the regulations are designed for the local or the college to be self-reflective in the meeting of those goals. For example, there could be a possibility that some of those goals weren't met because of COVID for different reasons, and that could be any of your answers are understandable. As a result of the UGG, no matter what your answers are, unless you put something down that's signifies you did something illegal, but nothing in your report will signify that something else has to occur as a result of your answers in the UGG. So if you say that we don't know how to do this, that doesn't mean that the TBR hammer is going to fall and we're going to come out and do some kind of monitoring based upon that or anything like that. It's a matter of self-reflection and possible changes internally that you decide to make as a result of that evaluation. But the UGG is required, but there are not repercussions or additional steps as a result of conducting and doing that self-assessment.
Welcome back, everyone. It is 10:05 Central Time, so we will get back to our meeting, and I'd like to introduce Joy Rich, our Post-Secondary State Skills USA Director, and she's going to share with you a Skills USA update.
Good morning, everyone. It is nice to see your faces. I'm going to transition here to our PowerPoints, and I also want to let you know the information I'll be presenting. You all are the very first people to get this information. So let me switch over. All right, Shana, can we see the PowerPoint?
I can see it.
Okay, excellent. So as you know, last year our Tennessee Skills USA Post-Secondary State Conference was canceled due to COVID. And since that time, a lot of efforts and thoughts and conversations have went into determining how to host this year's state conference. From the national level down, all of the state and national conferences will be virtual, or at least some form of a hybrid form of virtual. I have just completed our 2021 Skills USA Championship Guide, which is linked in this PowerPoint. And Shanna, I'll give you this PowerPoint to share out with everyone when we're finished as well. I will be delivering this information to all the Skills USA chapter advisors on the 3rd, so 2 days from now. So you can go ahead and give them a preview if you want, or you can just wait until they hear it from me on the 3rd. But this is just kind of a high-level overview of what's going to be taking place with Skills USA this year. First, rather than our conference taking place over just a 2-day window, we will be expanding the state conference from March 22nd through the 30th, with a live Grand Award session taking place on Friday, April the 2nd. I will explain in just a moment why we are expanding that time, but you can probably already figure that out. So let's talk about what Skills USA 2021 is going to look like. So I'm going with this reimagined theme because that's what we're having to do, is reimagine how to offer all 107 Skills USA championships through a virtual platform. We'll be doing this over a 2-week period so that our judges have the opportunity to engage with students, to assess their performance, and to provide their scores. I have included in this presentation the 2021 technical standards, and Nationals has created virtual options versus in-person options, and we will be using the virtual standards. The way this process will work, students have to already create a resume for their Skills USA contest. This year, however, on their resume, they will be asked to embed a digital file that showcases their demonstration of a specified skill. Each contest area is different, so it could be something as simple as a prepared speech that they record and they upload a Zoom file, a Google Meets file, a Teams file of them giving that presentation, or it could be them demonstrating doing a particular haircut for a barbering student. So each contest area will have a specific skill that they are going to be asked to demonstrate with very specific guidelines. Those will be uploaded through our platform, and then our judges will review the contestants' pre-recorded submissions. And then in most cases, we will be scheduling live Zoom follow-up sessions between the judges and those students. So it could look something like in barbering, they submitted their video of them completing a haircut, but then they will participate in a one-on-one interview with the judge through a Zoom session. And what we're trying to do there is give students the opportunity to directly engage with industry partners so that it feels as close to the real thing as possible, and an opportunity for our judges to clarify, to ask any supporting questions that they may have as a result of watching that pre-recorded submission. Each technical committee is reviewing their process now, and they will indicate which format will be applied, whether it will be all pre-recorded, if it will be a hybrid of pre-recorded and live Zoom, or if they want to do the entire process as a live Zoom. Our opening session and our closing sessions will stream live through Zoom webinar. I'm also looking into doing YouTube Live and Facebook Live as well. We will have pre-recorded sessions that teachers can see, students can see in advance, and those live recordings will be saved and shared with the advisors. So in the event anyone's not able to attend, they can see that. At our closing session, we will announce our gold, silver, and bronze medalists and our overall winners. And our first place winner will then advance and represent us at the National Skills USA Conference. Following that closing session, we will mail the state pins, state t-shirts, medals, and banners to each institution for them to distribute to their contestants. And I'm going to ask advisors that they take pictures of their students or even a short video clip of their students wearing their state shirts and pins and medals and have them send them back to me so that I can compile a champions video for our 2021 year. Another little piece I wanted to add in, and once again, you guys are the first to hear about this, we are rebranding our t-shirt and pin contest. Because of the virtual nature of our conference this year, a branding package contest is what we will be using instead. And so students are going to be asked, any student can create a design package that would be a t-shirt, a pin, and a social media post. And the winning t-shirt is what everyone will wear for state conference, as well as that pin. And the guidelines are embedded into this PowerPoint as well, which you can share with anyone that you like. Are there any questions from anyone? Let me also say, I have it in the championship guide. I don't have it in this PowerPoint. The registration fee, because I know you're considering your Perkins money, the registration fee for students is $55. The registration fee for advisors is $25. And that covers the cost of the t-shirts, the pins, the banners, the medals, and all of those being shipped to those campuses, as well as any cost that we will acquire for using our virtual platform. Okay, so Shane, if there's not any questions, I will turn it back over to you.
I will add quickly, Shannon, before you go take off, that Joy has been working tirelessly on this since COVID hit in March, when she was trying to imagine what a state conference would look like even back then. And she has been working diligently with business and industry to do meet the employer events electronically, the benefit of students, and also for the benefit of the employers. So thank you, Joy, for your continued efforts for all of our students and for our business and industry across Tennessee.
Absolutely.
And Joy, we did have one question in the chat from Jeffrey at TCAT Nashville. He's just wondering, since this is virtual, how will integrity of submissions be assured?
So that is why the videos will go through Zoom, Teams, or Google Meet. When you record, let's say a student is doing a welding competition, there's specific guidelines that will be given out, and I'll go into more detail on this on Wednesday, but we'll have a 2-camera system set up in place at each school. They'll be asked to have 2 cameras, one directly on the student performing the task and one on the room that they are in. And you will start up a Zoom meeting or a Teams meeting or a Google Meet. It doesn't matter which platform you're using, and you'll record the entire process. That recording is then uploaded. And so we can see from that if any edits have been made. We can tell if anyone's advising the student, giving them any hints, things like that. The same process for interviews. Those will take place through Zoom, and the judges will be directly with the students asking those questions. And we're also, for the testing, there's only a handful that will have testing, like medical terminology. We're not going to do testing with all of the events, only those that are a test for the contest. Those will take place through Zoom, and we will actually have the proctors have on the campuses, we'll have a proctor, but then also the students will take it with their camera pointing at their hand, their body, like they will have to position their camera in such a way that we can determine that they're not looking on their phone to look up answers, that they're not asking a friend, etc. So as much as possible, we will try to put those regulations in place, but to an extent, we just have to trust, ethics and integrity on the place of the students and those advisors who are supervising them. Any other questions?
I don't see any other questions in the chat, Joy. Jeffrey did say thank you, that's great.
Awesome.
So if any other questions come up, you're welcome to email those to me and I can forward them on to Joy, or you can email Joy directly, joy.rich@tbr.edu, with any questions you may have regarding Skills USA.
Yes, and anyone who wants to attend the meeting that I'm doing on the 3rd, I'm happy to send that invite out as well. I will be going into a lot more detail on the 3rd about all the contests and specifically what's going to happen. But today, I just wanted to give you a high-level overview so that you guys can kind of do some planning in your Perkins.
Okay, thank you so much, Joy. We appreciate you taking time to speak with us today.
Sure, thanks, Shana.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we will get back into our required reporting. I always say Joy gets the fun part, and then we have to go back to required Perkins reports, right? So next on the agenda is the annual risk assessment. So I'm going to share my screen again. Let's get there. Okay, so the annual risk assessment, this is a piece that's always requested each year for our Perkins audit. This is a piece that we ask our colleges to complete, and then we also, in the Office of Student Success at TBR, we also complete this risk assessment for each of our colleges receiving Perkins funds. This report is due at the end of March. Here is a sample of the report. This has been updated slightly since last year. The biggest updates were just taking away the extra indicators of performance. So now you see you just have 1P1, 2P1, 3P1, and those extra 3 indicators are now removed. This template is set up so that the college would fill in the cells that are shaded in yellow. The other areas will be pre-filled in where it says state determined level of performance goal. Those are the goals that we just showed you a little bit earlier. You would type in the college's actual performance in the actual column in the yellow cells. For this report, unlike the UGG, we're only looking to see that the college met 90% of the required goal. So if the college does meet 90%, it will automatically calculate with a yes or a no if the college meets that goal. And then in the yellow section under populations not met, we're looking to see any populations, racial populations, gender, special populations that we looked at earlier. We're looking to see any populations that did not meet, even if the overall goal was met. In section B, we're looking for the percentage of the budget that was spent, the Perkins budget that was spent in the previous year. Section C is the year of last audit and how many audit findings exist, if there were any. Just below section C, we ask that you list a description of the findings. In section D, we're looking for the Perkins contact at the college, their name, as well as their start date in that position. So in the Perkins coordinator position, and how many years has that person been in the Perkins contact position. Section E is the date the institution was last monitored for Perkins. And then you'll see at the bottom, there's a risk analysis score. So each section A, B, C, and D, will automatically calculate based on the answers that you type in those yellow cells in those sections. And then we use that total score. Audit wants to see that score. We look at that score for monitoring each year. I know that was a very brief overview, but whenever it's time for this form to be completed, I will send out a technical assistance video specific to this form. That will be sent out at the beginning of the month, so the beginning of March. You'll receive the technical assistance video with more detail. You'll receive the template, and then that assignment will be uploaded into the Perkins team. Questions on the risk assessment? I see there was a question and Michael answered that. I'll just say it out just in case anybody else had the same question. Is the audit year talking specifically about Perkins being audited? And the answer to that is yes. If there are any other questions, feel free to type those into the chat at any time and we'll get to those.
And Shana, just to wrap that up, since Charles asked the question, basically every year through the Tennessee Department of Education, the state comptroller does audit Perkins. And so as sub-grantees, that means that we are audited, which is why each of these reports that are required are important that you make sure that you know how to do. And if we get those in on time during those months, then we can be prepared to answer those questions for you when state audit comes around in October, November each year.
Okay, again, if you have any questions, feel free to put those in the chat and we will come back to those. But for now, we can go ahead and move on to the next required piece of documentation, which is the Comprehensive Local Needs Assessment. So I believe that Michael is going to overview this, and then we have a few of our coordinators who have graciously agreed to share their insights and best practices after Michael kind of gives us an overview of the CLNA.
Okay, so the Comprehensive Local Needs Assessment is probably the largest change from between Perkins 4 and Perkins 5. So what we said earlier holds true, is that you can only spend funds that are in your application that has been approved. That has always been the case in Perkins 4 and previously. What's new in Perkins 5 is that it can't go into your application unless it's been in your Comprehensive Local Needs Assessment. So that slide you see on the screen there, Section 134C, is actually part of the Perkins legislation, and it actually lists out verbatim that you have to have a comprehensive local needs assessment written, and that's what your information for your application is derived from. You have to have a CLNA in every program area that is eligible to receive Perkins funds. That was a dramatic pause, by the way. So if you are considering welding, making this up, if you're considering welding to get Perkins funding at all over the next however many years you think about, they need to be producing a CLNA. The best way to produce those is to utilize the vehicles that we already have at the college level, which are the program advisory committees. Now, what that should look like, basically, we are a unique animal across the country in that we have program advisory committee meetings that occur either once a year or twice a year already. And so most of this information is being discussed anyway at the program advisory committee with a few exceptions, but we haven't been documenting that simply because all that's been required in Perkins previous to Perkins 5 was making sure that you had a list of the individuals, business and industry representatives that were a part of the CLNA process, the program advisory committee meeting process. So with the comprehensive local needs assessment, all that's being stated in legislation is that they want to see what the program advisory committee, even though they don't use that phrase, what we call the program advisory committee is actually putting forth as needs. So in welding, if they say they need another instructor because they have a need for more instructors, then that's what comes out of the program advisory committee. That does not mean that the college has to get them an instructor, but you're collecting as a college, and you as the Perkins coordinator are collecting all of the CLNAs from each program area, and then in whatever format that the college decides is appropriate, is deciding how to spend the Perkins dollars based upon the CLNA documentation from all of the career and technical education fields within the college. All right. You see on the screen some key areas of CLNA. Those are nothing new that didn't exist previously. What does exist that is new is the access or is the inclusion of special populations in there. If you can go to the next slide, Shana. So this is the actual piece of legislation of the requirements. This is just a screenshot of the actual legislation. And I guess, Shana, I don't know that we've done that, but I guess what I'll do after I finish my discussion here is that I will actually attach a PDF in the chat of the actual Perkins 5 language, and for some reason, in case you don't have it, so that you can have the full documentation instead of just taking these different requirement sections as she has on the screen here. It talks about what needs to be in each paragraph of the CLNA and so forth. But basically, we've drafted templates based upon this legislation that you can utilize, and we'll get to hear from a couple of the colleges in a few moments about some of the things that they're doing for their CLNA process. The CLNA process, yes, can be very burdensome if you think about it in totality. To think that you as an individual would need to go to each program advisory committee meeting, document all these things, make sure all the right questions are asked, is very daunting, to say the least. I know in 2018, in the fall, as soon as in July, the end of July, when the Perkins 5 legislation passed, in the fall of 2018, I went to a college and actually was a part of one of the program advisory committee meetings. And we had a great discussion with the business and industry, and we had the instructor who was actually explaining the STLOP information. So your state determined levels of performance, the business and industry person never had seen this data before. So this is some of the new information that, go to the next slide, Shana, about data, is that the business and industry hadn't seen this data. Now, you and I in the education sphere, maybe we see this data a lot of times, but for the business and industry, they don't always see this. And it was broken down to the program level. So they got to see within their program that they had 12 students in the program, and 3 of them didn't make it for whatever reason. And so there started a real rich discussion about why these students didn't make or complete the program. And basically the instructor, kind of shrugged it off to, this is kind of what happens. Not everybody, we don't have 100% completion, etc. The business person basically then came back and said, well, what was the exact reason? And I interrupted and asked for the instructor to give the first name of a student that stood out that didn't make it. The instructor gave the student's first name, and then we talked, and I said, well, tell me what happened to that student. Why didn't that student complete? And to make a long story short, the student didn't complete because they had car issues, transportation issues, and the business and industry person kind of was flustered because he would have been happy, he said, to spend enough money to get that person's vehicle fixed, to buy that person a gas card, whatever it would have taken, because that person he wanted to be able to utilize in his shop. And as a result of that discussion, the instructor reached out to the student who 2 semesters prior had dropped out of the program and had connected him with the business person, and that person actually ended up being employed even though they didn't finish their education at that time. I think they were going to go back, but at that time, the business person hired them anyway, make sure that they needed them in their shop. So there was some real rich discussion that hadn't occurred previously because they were sharing state-determined levels of performance data down to the program level. I know some of you may be thinking, well, what if the program level data, unless it talks about, you can talk about overall student data, make sure it's at least twice as much, or excuse me, at least double digits. So that you can share some of that. If some of that data, if you talk about special populations is too small, then you can maybe put that together with all student population just so you can share that with your particular program. But again, it could be daunting if you had to do this all on your own. But Shane and I are happy to come out if we need to. But we also can share these templates so that you could share those possibly with all the instructors and make sure that they're asking those questions and answering those questions with their program advisory committee. And then at the college level, some colleges have a college level program advisory committee. Not all colleges do that, but you could do that. Because when you have to have special populations represented across the spectrum, it might be hard to get all those special populations for every program. But you need to have that voice in the room at some level, even if it's a college level. That then, for the example I like to use is the Native American population, is that if you can get a representative that maybe can't travel to your college, but can be available through email or maybe even a webinar, that at the college level you can have that person share some of the challenges that Native American students face in career and technical education, then that might be something that is useful for us as administrators or for instructors to be able to help either draw in Native American students, even though there may be only a few in your entire region, but or for those students who are Native American and happen to be in one of your programs that you did not even know was a need. So having that input is required, but you don't have to do it for each program level, especially if you have a college level program advisory committee where you can get that input from that individual. So there are many options out there for the special populations. Some of those can be shared in the chat. Shana, that's something we need to start collecting as we talk to colleges, whether it be students with disabilities or Native American students or so forth, that we can maybe collect and have a shared, I don't want to call it Jamboard, but maybe a general posting that we have for resources across the state that colleges utilize, and that can be shared either on our website or as a document between colleges.
So we have Terry Messer from Jackson State Community College. We also have Jackie Wilson from Roane State Community College, and we have Daphne Brown from Tennessee College of Applied Technology at McKinsey. And I'd like to ask Daphne Brown to go ahead and speak first. Has let me know in the chat that she is ready. So Daphne, if you are ready to speak, we're ready to hear you.
Okay, can everybody hear me?
I can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right, guys. So I will say that definitely the most intimidating to me in getting started was putting together a committee that was diverse, and that was the challenge for me. I'm going to use 2 analogies. First, I think that the Perkins application and the process is kind of like a fast-moving train. You're never going to know everything and understand everything before you jump on. So it's just a matter of just jump in there and you will learn as you go. I think that Shana and Michael has been incredibly supportive to me as I would submit things. I would ask them, I would say, can you review this, make sure it's right? because this is what I'm going to use as a template moving forward. So having that feedback, really makes me feel better about the process. The second one is it's just like eating an elephant. One bite at a time. I think that Shayna has put those videos out there, and we do those monthly. That is amazing, because I know that today you're hearing all of this, and it's overwhelming, because I remember the first time that I sat in a meeting and heard it. You're hearing everything today. But just remember, these pieces are broken up throughout the year. You get emails and prompts, and so it's not like you're just out there in an ocean. You're helped all along the way. So I wanted to make sure and just say those things, especially to those who have never done it before. So I started with section G, which was, again, the most intimidating section, and that was the advisory committee. And first thing that I did was I met with the instructors and also my president to say, okay, here's what we need. Let's get everybody on board. You need administrative support to help move that forward with everybody. So you really need to talk to your leaders and let them know what you need, let them know what you're looking for, and then talk to your faculty, because a lot of times they'll have people that'll be like, oh yeah, well, so-and-so would fit that. I work with them a lot, that kind of stuff. One of the areas I was a little bit nervous about was the Native American inclusion, and I put in the chat the name of Tarua Inol from Smyrna, and she's actually a Native American Indian Association Appointment and Training Program Director, and very, very happy to help and work with us. So would meet virtually, would come to the campus once COVID's over, those kinds of things. So definitely somebody, especially for those that's in your area, could utilize to run things past. All of ours, I will say, this year have been virtual, obviously. So that actually, I think, made it a little better for us this first time, because we were able to kind of break it down into smaller bites, if you will. So that was helpful. But really talking to your faculty about the need of who would fill these certain roles really took a lot of concern off my back anyway, because I was really worried about what that was going to look like. In using our the parents, having parents included, we have, and I'm sure a lot of you do too, parents that are highly involved on your campus. Maybe it was just that they're always coming, to your FAFSA nights, your tours, always supportive of their students. So that's the pool that I try to utilize there. And then as far as utilizing students on campus, I pulled from my skills folks, my National Technical Honor Society students, and also my SOAR students, my Outstanding Students of the Year. So those were the ways that I kind of put my committee together. It wasn't as scary as I thought it was going to be. I think the other thing too is you cannot do this by yourself. You have to have your administrators and your faculty all working together as a team. While you're the person that coordinates all of this, you've got to have everybody involved, or it just won't flow like you need it to, and you're going to get overburdened. As far as the committees are concerned, prior to COVID, this has always been a best practice for us. We have 2 advisory committees per year. Those are on a scheduled night. So our president will put out months in advance. The advisory committee meeting this year is going to be on this date. And so everybody will start, now this is prior to COVID, in the same room. So everybody kind of starts together, and then they break out into their individual meetings. So I haven't gotten to do this yet, but I envision, once we go back to that model, that I will talk about what we need, in our comprehensive needs assessment to those members. But for now, I had to rely on my faculty, and I'm sure they'll tell you I nagged the week before. I need this. Make sure you say this. Make sure this is included in your minutes, because I wanted to make sure that if there was an on-ground audit or ever anybody said, hey, I need to see where it said this, I wanted to make sure that it was in those minutes. So then after they were over, I asked for minutes to be sent to me so that I could review again and make sure that all that was in there. And they did an excellent job. I was nervous about it, but they did an amazing job. So I think it's just a matter of communication. In creating the comprehensive needs assessment, as I went down through there, Michael and Shana will tell you over and over, think broad. You're making this big plan. Do not say very specific things. Like, I tried not to say this very specific trainer, this very specific piece of equipment. I tried to keep it broad because there may be that you have to change things. So during COVID, we didn't go into this thinking about all of the virtual delivery method that we were going to be providing, but that became very challenging for TCATs because it's hands-on learning. So we started seeing the needs for trainers, and some of these trainers are portable, so students could, take them and utilize them, that kind of thing, in order to acquire that hands-on portion. Faculty was needing GoPros, for example, so they could do some training videos. So we tried to stay broad with virtual delivery type pieces like that, so that we could, once we got deep into COVID, figure out, what we were going to need. And the other thing was we really have no idea when we go virtual again. They're utilizing a hybrid right now, but at any point we could go virtual again. And so we weren't planning for all of that when we started having these Perkins talks back before, COVID struck, but it did pop up and it did become a need. So that was heavy on how I had written my comprehensive needs assessment as far as that was concerned, and especially servicing those dual enrollment students. That has been at the forefront of our campus because with our wait list and with our social distancing, it became clear that it was going to be really complicated to get to those students. So we definitely had to start thinking about how we were going to do that. The other thing is digital equity. How are we going to include students that are, out there in areas that don't have Wi-Fi? That kind of stuff. So thinking about those things is how I ended up going into my comprehensive needs assessment for this year. And I would be happy to share that with anyone. If you want to reach out to me, I will share that to you. Or if you want to reach out to Shana, and Shana, it's fine to share that, so that you can kind of have a model of what I did. Especially, it's probably going to be heavy TCAT. So especially to those of you who are on the TCAT side, you can kind of look and see how that was written and how that was, put together. I kind of processed it section by section. So I might work on section A, and it might be a few days, and then I'd go to B, and so on and so forth. But then I would go back around and, I need to do this, or I need to include that. So with that one, I would not wait until the deadline. I can't remember. I think it was due on the 30th. I actually started that well in advance because I knew that as I talked to folks and as things developed, we would start to see, oh, wait, maybe I need to put this in there. I need to put that in there. Or maybe there's a special group. I know Carroll Academy started reaching out and being really responsive, and they actually service students who have kind of been expelled from their school or had some trouble. And so they were at first kind of hard to get it in there, but then I started talking to some folks and they started inviting me over, and I really started to see some things that could develop between us that would be helping of those students. So just kind of keeping that in mind. It's kind of a living document. As I see things happen now on campus, I might go over there. I've got it done in Word, so I might pop a little note in there so that next time when I'm writing this, I'll keep that in mind. So when I pull it up to review or redo, I'll have these little sticky notes over here on the side that'll say, this happened, you might want to consider this, just kind of a living document as you go. So that's kind of where I went with it. That was my strategy. And Shana, I guess I don't have any questions or anything, but that's my input as a first timer.
Yeah, thank you, Daphne, so much for sharing. If anyone has specific questions for Daphne, if you'd like to unmute yourself and ask right now, that would be totally fine, or you're welcome to enter those questions in the chat and we can get to those.
If nobody wants to say anything right now, I popped my email over in the chat, so feel free to reach out to me personally. Thank y'all.
Thank you again. We really appreciate you sharing with us today. I'd like to call on our next coordinator who is willing to share with us. So let's see who we've got. Terry Messer at Jackson State. If you are ready, we're ready to hear from you now.
Great. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you.
Perfect. Well, I feel like we're going from Daphne being the newest to me not being the newest on the Perkins team. So I wanted to share, the only thing I had kind of thought when you asked me if I would share anything with this is this comprehensive local needs assessment, guys. Technically, we've been using this concept forever in Perkins because we as coordinators are not the ones that are determining where we need to spend the money. It's been all of our CTE programs providing us that information. What I found positive, and I'll say that truly positive for this process, was getting everything documented. And when we're looking at, when we rolled into Perkins 5, we were to be doing a 4-year plan. And if you'll think about it, it was a 4-year budget plan. So how would you know it to budget unless you knew what the items were that you needed? So this all backed up perfectly, but this was a tremendous amount of work initially. And Daphne said she started on in advance. I'm talking about you need to be starting on this a year in advance, basically, because as Michael alluded to, I'm a dean here at Jackson State, so I have 2 programs that I watch over that have advisory committees. But we have 15 advisory committees on campus for our CTEs. I got myself on each one of those 15 advisory committee agendas for the first year. And what I found interesting was everyone welcomed us because, again, all of our allied health and our nursing and our computer and our business programs, they've all been utilizing Perkins funds. But what I found is that many of even the program directors weren't real sure how Perkins flowed down, how it worked, and certainly the advisory committee membership didn't. So it was really a good learning process. But what we did with that, they gave me 10, 15 minutes in each meeting. I explained what Perkins was. I explained to them that in order for us to continue with the new legislation that we're going to need to make sure we've documented their needs. And then I asked a very broad statement. I said, what can we at Jackson State do for your employer, you as the employer? What do we need to be doing different in our programs? A couple of them said, well, I don't know if you could afford that. I said, that's the point for me being here. If I don't get what you want on the list, we'll never be able to afford it. I said, and there is no way. We just get a small amount of money. There's no way that we can get what all 15 programs want, but at least we'll have somewhere to start from. So that was the gist of it. So yes, Michael wasn't joking. It is going to take a lot of your time initially. Now, that was a lot going on. But what you did then was able to take all of that and compile those. I mean, we were talking those items. What did they say they wanted? Everything from, you've got to have more mechanical ventilators. Well, that was even pre-COVID. We needed ventilators in our respiratory program. Everything that went from specific equipment to broad equipment to broad needs, such as how can we get diversity in your school so that we'll have further diversity in our workplace. So there was a lot of different needs with that. So basically you pull all of that together. And then for me, I was able to look at that 4-year budget and go, okay, assuming we get about the same amount of money each year, what is fair and equitable over the next 4 years to allow each of these programs to get at least something that their advisory committee wanted. In between, of course, we've got other grants and other funding sources that we're always trying to get what our folks need. So then this year, when we needed to update this, all I did was, again, each of our program directors and program leads continued to keep this as a line item on their agenda. I didn't necessarily attend all of the meetings, but they kept it on there. Look, hey, what do you need updated? Let's talk about our Perkins equipment. And we were able to actually find some funding for one of the needs from an alternate source. So we said, hey, just because, it makes the advisory committee think that, hey, they told us what they needed and the college listened and look, we've got this. So that was kind of the gist of it. But I think, so that was the time consuming part. But after it's over, it's easy to say that it really did make sense to do that, because now you've got your layout, if you will, for the next few years. Then you just update it, because again, technology changes as quickly as we can blink. So what they thought they needed 2 years ago, they may not need now. And then the other thing that I thought was most helpful was the template that Michael described, the one that had the sections A through whatever, F or G. Guys, just be very thorough in your answering on those, and any new programs, anything from a pre-apprenticeship to a full-fledged apprenticeship to embedded certificates. Go on and put that in there so that we can see what our plans are, and all of that should have aligned with what your local needs assessment said. This is from our advisory groups. Also, we have many of us work very closely with our WIOA boards. What programs are they needing? Our chambers, offices, what programs are they seeing? What are they looking at? What new companies are coming to our region? What specific skill sets do they have? Between your local, community colleges and TCATs, do at least one of us have that program available that could help that workforce? If not, we need to make sure that we've got that included. So that, in a nutshell, is kind of the way we started it. And to me, it was a good framework to do everything from the budget to tie together what industry needs. And I did work very closely with our student services division on campus to determine how are we addressing the special populations. The only thing that I found challenging with that is that most of our student services at the community college level are designed for the population as a whole, not just the CTE program seekers. So you kind of have to write that up a little cautiously. So with that was my brief how we got started.
Great. Thank you so much, Terry, for sharing with us. And if any of you have questions for Terry specifically, you're welcome to unmute yourself and ask now, or you can just type your question in the chat and we can come back to that. And Terry just put her email address in the chat if you'd like to reach out to her specifically. Thank you for doing that. And then lastly on our list of Perkins coordinators to share is Jackie Wilson from Roane State Community College. Jackie, if you are ready, we're ready to hear from you.
Shana, I'm ready. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am. I can hear you.
Great. One thing I noticed with Daphne and Terry's presentations, which were awesome, and I learned so much from both of them, is, we all have different positions at our institution, and that kind of plays into how you're able to coordinate everything and gather all the information that you need for the CLNA. My position, I am the dual enrollment coordinator and the Perkins grant manager. I'm fairly low on the totem pole. So when it comes to, doing something institution-wide, I've really had to step out of my comfort zone and go to the VPs and go to different directors and go to the deans. This is what we need. This is why we need it. So that, was very overwhelming to me, and but it's been a learning process, and I'm still learning. And like Daphne said, this is a living document. It's constantly changing because your needs are constantly changing. I mean, if nothing else, COVID has shown us that this year. So with the original, the 4-year needs assessment, we did a couple of different things. We reached out to all the program directors and their advisory boards. We sent out a monkey survey and tried to get basically a baseline for all the information that we needed. And then once we compiled all that, and I say we, Shelly Esquivel, who's also on this meeting, has just been my savior for a lot of things. She is our grants and IR person who, she's the one I go crying to when Perkins throws something else at me. But she has, really helped a lot with gathering the information and working on the reports and the documents that we need for the CLNA. And so compiling all of that together, she came up with a couple of different forms that we could use. And so once we had the 4-year baseline, and then each year we're doing the updated CLNA to show, anything that's changed. Again, COVID has thrown a wrench into a lot of stuff. And so what I've been doing is sending out a form that, and attached to that form is the data for that program. And so that director can take that data and take that form to their advisory meeting, go over the data with their advisory board, and then fill out the form, update it with, any new needs that have popped up, anything that they need to address the data, for whether it's non-trad or whatever it may be, anything they come up with how they're going to address that if they can. And again, as mentioned earlier, I think Michael said, some of our sample sizes, so to speak, are very small. So you really kind of have to look at the institutional goal rather than the individual program goal because they're such small sizes. But anyway, so they update those and send them back, and then we try to compile all of that into the new updated one. And we use the same templates, I think, that Michael has been providing for us. And it's really given us a good look at what each program needs, and what we're going to be doing going forward with those programs, maybe what's missing, or what we can attain in the future with that. And I see that someone said asked to share the form, and if I can, Shada, I'll pop that up on the screen.
Sure. Yeah, I'm going to stop sharing so that you can share.
Okay. And I haven't done this before with Teams, so let's hope this works.
Okay. I can see it.
Okay. So this is the update form that we send out. And again, as you can see with A, we attach the performance results so that they can review that data, and then we ask specific questions about it. And we just go down through. These are all taken from the templates. And then the last one, H, with your board members, please review the 4-year request that you submitted last year, and put whatever needs to be changed, if they need to change the priority of them, list if they need to address the gaps, anything like that. And they return that. And then we also, let me see if I can pull this other one up. Okay. And this is the format we send out for the request. So as you can see, they select which year they're putting these requests down for, and then the use of funds that it addresses, the breakdown of the spending, and then any justification that they need to show on the form. And then we just send that out every year, or we're going to be sending that out. Is it not showing? Can you see it, Shana?
I can't see that one.
Oh.
I could see the first one.
All right, well, I'll send it out. Okay. You can send it out to everybody. But anyway, so it just has those categories of where they can update everything. And then again, like I said, when we get that back and they've shared that with their advisory board and the data and everything, then we can compile that all into the updated CLNA. But that's basically it. And it's something that we know that we're going to be constantly changing and coming up with new ideas of how to get more stakeholders involved. Shelly is on here, and Shelly said she could chime in if she needed to, but if you have any questions for either one of us, we'll be happy to answer. And I'll put my email in the chat as well.
Thank you very much, Jackie. We appreciate it. And yes, if anyone has questions that you've thought of for any of our 3 ladies who have graciously volunteered their time and their insights, you're welcome to unmute yourself and ask those, or you can just type your question in the chat.
I thought that was really unique. We had Daphne, who was new, Terry, who's been around longer than she'd like to admit, and then Jackie's kind of right in between there. And so hearing from each of those 3 different perspectives was really unique, and I hope you all enjoyed that. I was appreciative for those colleges sharing, so thank you, ladies.